Welcome to Careers Unwrapped, where we delve into real-life career stories from successful people who've been through it all, the ups and the downs. We'll get their raw, honest, actionable advice and be the careers talk they wish they'd had when they started out. As someone who has had a varied career, from soldier to salesman, expedition leader to entrepreneur, he knows firsthand that your career doesn't always lead you where you expect it to. Here's your host, Mark Fawcett.
Hello. On today's episode of Careers Unwrapped, we're joined by Phil Harding, who is a seasoned fieldwork archaeologist with a career spanning over 50 years now. Phil's been a central figure in British archaeology. He's also known for his regular appearances on Channel 4's Time Team. He's dedicated much of his career actually to excavating significant sites all around the UK and sharing his knowledge of what he finds and of the works through public demonstrations, through educational outreach, and also written publications such as his recent book release, Joining the Dots. He holds an honorary doctorate from the University of Southampton, and he's also been recognised numerous times for his contributions to the field. So, Phil, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
I think let's just start really from the beginning here. What was the trigger for you, the first thing that captivated your interest in pursuing archaeology?
I think the answer to that is the moment I was born. I've been asked that question so many times, and there's no point in trying to be philosophical about it. I was born to be an archaeologist. That's why I was on the planet. That's why I'm here. I don't think I ever had any control over what was going to happen to my life. Some people would say that was incredibly lucky, and some people, I don't know, they might turn around and say, I'm glad it wouldn't happen for me. For me, I know that's why I'm here, to be an archaeologist. No point, no. There wasn't a road to Damascus moment where I turned around and discovered archaeology. It's just been there all my life.
Can you remember any of your first finds as a child? I mean, before you were a professional, what you started doing?
I can remember the first object I ever found. I still have it. But at the time I didn't know what it was. I can't remember how young I was at the time, but something told me it was special. It was different. And I kept it. And when I started digging, I got talking to a supervisor and about this object. And he said, bring it in. Let me have a look at it. And a number of times I, on the point of throwing it away, I won't keep it. And I took it to him. He took one look at it. And he said, that's nice. What is that? He said, that's a broken early Neolithic leaf-shaped arrowhead. It's about, 4,000 BC or something like that. Now, of course, people come to me now and they ask me my opinions. It just shows how much experience and skill and learning transfers across. When I was in that position, I knew nothing about what I was looking at. Now I would know instantly. My one regret is that I don't know where I found it. I suspect it was in the village, in the garden, where the village that I was living in at the time. But as an archaeologist, number one question is, where does it come from? And sadly, I don't know.
Where does it come from? And also, when does it come from, I guess? And one thing that we're often asked by people who are starting out in the careers is, what does it actually feel like to do a job? What is a week in your life like? So I imagine there can be quite a lot of variety, but what have you practically been doing over the last few weeks?
As you said in your introduction, I have been doing this job for rather a long time. Some people must say, too long. The daily life of an archaeologist has changed immeasurably in the 50-odd years. You want to remember that when I set out on my career, my path, be a professional archaeologist, you could not be an archaeologist. The career did not exist. And when I kicked off, basically we were just itinerants. We were navvies. We went from site to site. We weren't paid wages. We were paid a subsistence fee. It was just enough to keep you alive, basically. We lived where we could in tents. We might, if we were lucky, we might be given a caravan to sleep in. In other cases, if we were digging in a town or a city, if there was properties that were going to be redeveloped, knocked down and redeveloped, you would be in there and you would unroll your sleeping bag and you'd doss down in there and you'd live there until the demolition crew comes in. I mean, don't get me wrong. It might sound as though it was a career in the Stone Age. It was primitive, but at the time I was young, carefree, enjoying life and all the rest of it. I've never been bothered by money. That's not what has driven me. What has driven me is this passion for archaeology. And at a very early age, when I bumped into a careers advisory officer, and I explained why I want to be an archaeologist and that's what I want to do. And he said, well, I don't think I can help you. He said, you know more about archaeology than I do. He said, my advice to you, the only advice I can give you is if you want to do it enough, go and do it. Go and do it to the best of your ability for as long as you can and as well as you can. If you get to a point where you say, no, I can't do it anymore, I've got to look for something else, and maybe carry on archaeology as a hobby or as a pastime, turn around and say, at least I tried.
Well, you certainly tried, and you also did it, I think, as well as you can, and are still doing it as long as you can. But if when you started, it was sleeping bags on dusty floors of old buildings, what's it like now for a young person who wants to start?
Now it is a profession. Now people can be archaeologists. People can be employed by archaeological companies to work as archaeologists. They are paid. They are taxed. They get sick benefit. They get pension schemes. They get holiday times. They get decent accommodation. They get travel allowance. It is a profession. And yes, of course, everything now is rigorously enforced in terms of health and safety and qualifications in that respect as well. When I kicked off in my career, I mean, there was no such thing as health and safety. You were not given safety boots, a hard hat, and all the rest of it. And I think it's one of the things that I'm quite proud of, the fact my career has spanned that point where you could not be an archaeologist to a point now where you can be an archaeologist. And I can't, if there's young people watching and listening to this that feel they want to be an archaeologist, they can be. It is possible now. It's not going to be easy. Is anything easy in this life? You work hard at it. You struggle along. You build up experience. You persist. That's what you want to do. And yes, now, in terms of salaries, the salaries are not astronomically high, but they are meteorically higher than what I was, what I was being paid. Like I say, I wasn't paid a wage. I was paid subsistence. I was paid literally just enough to keep me alive almost. And
so do you work now with young students and budding archaeologists who are starting on their career?
Me now, lesser so. Why? Because of advancing years. And so, I mean, there is now within the career much more of a structure, and by and large, the field workers tend to be the people who are younger. They're the people that are out on the site. And then gradually you become, you go into sort of supervisory roles, site direction roles, which means that you get involved a lot more with the administration of the excavation. And then you go on up perhaps into lower forms of management and higher forms of management, what have you. There are just so many different aspects to archaeology. It's not just about digging holes. There are people who study documents and records and what have you and build up background work. There are people who do standing buildings. There are people who do underwater archaeology. There are people who do environmental archaeology. There are people who specialize in artifacts and the object.
So a lot more variety than people might think. And I guess another area that must have changed a lot is technology and how technology can be used to support archaeology. Where have you seen the greatest changes around the use of technology? Where have you seen the greatest changes around the use of technology?
Oh, well, I mean, I guess digital, any form of digital stuff. I mean, years ago, everything was written down in a site notebook. If you didn't write it down, it didn't do. Now it's all done digitally on tablets and all the rest of it. Of course, for old fossils like me, I'm totally out of sync with it. But what I miss for in digital capabilities, I like to think I make up for it by experience.
And talking therefore about experience and possibly even old fossils, what have been some of the highlights for you? Particular digs, particular finds? What are the pieces that you think that was a top career moment?
Yeah, I mean, you've got to remember over 50 years of digging, and I was physically digging for over 50 years. Not many people do that nowadays because a lot of people have moved up into management and all those sorts of things. I was in the field for over 50 years, and in fact, when I realised that it was time to pull the plug, I was digging with people who were biologically young enough not only to be my sons, but my grandsons. And that's when I realised that the sort of lifestyle that I could live and did live when I was in my 20s, by the time I got into my 60s, I couldn't do it anymore. And so I had to reinvent myself. And now I spend more time on the computer writing. And I quite enjoy that, because what I means is that you're creating a far better archaeological legacy. There's nothing better than finding stuff. But what does it tell you about anything? Does it tell you about the past? And now I've kind of honed my writing skills, and I kind of enjoy that, because you're creating that record, and there's something very satisfying about seeing a piece of work and you know that it's being incorporated into a journal, and that journal is going to be put onto a library shelf, and that people or scholars will be able to take that off that shelf long after I've been pushing up the daisies and referring back to my contribution in archaeology. Something very satisfying about that.
My interest in archaeology has always been with the personal stories that are told. Because I know that you and Wessex Archaeology has a dig which has been revisited many years called Barrow Clump, I think. And the stories of what are unearthed there, and I'm hoping you can maybe bring this a little bit to life, how you do this. I find the objects of a certain level of interest, but then what you use the objects for to tell about the people who had those objects. I find that fascinating. And how do you do that?
That's pretty much exactly what I'm saying. You know, if I'm digging a hole in the ground and I find, I don't know, in my case, a flint arrowhead, and I'm very pleased, I'm chuffed to bits that I found that arrowhead. But the first thing I do then is get a plastic bag, write on the label that that's what it is, bung it in there, and it goes away. And then you go back to and you dig some more up and you find another piece of bone or another piece of pot. What does it tell you? And what you're saying is it's the stories. And I think the more I get involved with archaeology, as I write, it's that ability or that aim to tell a story. And even though I do say so myself, one of the things that I think was very successful about Time Team, the Channel 4 program that you mentioned, was that it was making archaeology accessible by telling straightforward stories in words that ordinary people could understand. And there's two ways of me, if I write, I can write in a very academic style, which goes over a lot of people's heads, or you don't have to dumb down, but anybody can read it. It can have exactly the same information in there. You just have to have that skill of just being able, you're not proving anything by using highfalutin words. You just bring it down into normal conversation.
And in these 5 decades of digging, as you said, you've obviously been involved in a lot of finds, a lot of discoveries, a lot of then the academic work that's followed that. But out of all of them, perhaps pick one where you can show how the story of the find connects to what you then found about people, about people's lives.
That's dead easy. My favourite site, but funnily enough, it was the last site I ever dug. And it was not my favourite because it was the last one I'd say, I'm never going to get my hands dirty again. It was the most wonderful excavation. I mean, first of all, you have to understand I'm a prehistorian. I love prehistory. I love that remoteness in time. So I'm a prehistorian. So it was a prehistoric site. It was on chalk, which is my heart is in Wiltshire. So a lot of big chunks of Wiltshire are on chalk. It's a lovely, lovely geology. So add that as well. It was in my beloved county of Wiltshire. And so that was beneficial. But it was also very, very closely linked to, in period times, to a site just up the road from me, Stonehenge. And so it has produced the largest quantity of pottery of that date, certainly in southern England. And that style of pottery was the style of pottery that was being made by the people who first laid out Stonehenge. And one of the things about Stonehenge is that there are a lot of cremation burials there, burnt remains. And when we first started to get the radiocarbon dates back, because radiocarbon dates have now just got so sophisticated, so accurate. And a chap said to me, do you realise, Phil, he said, the people that are buried at Stonehenge may have visited your site. And you go, stone me, that's quite something, you know.
So the people who first made Stonehenge, who pulled the stones over there, and then who used Stonehenge for whatever purposes they were using it for, could well have eaten or drunk or stored food in the finds that you were making. The connection could be that close.
Well, you see, I mean, a lot of the, certainly the really big stones at Stonehenge would not have been there when my folks were living on their site. The big stones didn't come for another 500 years. These were the guys who laid out the circle, the bank and ditch. They were the ground workers, if you like, who did that work. And a lot of their influences were from Orkney. So this is this period of where ideas were coming down from Orkney. And every now and again, it's your pleasure and your privilege to get a site. I don't think it would be far wide of the mark to say a game changer. You know, there's a hell of a lot of what we do in archaeology, which is repetitive. I would never call it mundane. But if you dig up, an Iron Age roundhouse, there have been umpteen roundhouse excavations done, and it makes another dot on the map. But you're not really going to learn much about Iron Age roundhouses from another one. You just need to know where people were living and where people were and how they were colonizing the landscape and all the rest of it. But with this site of mine on the edge of Salisbury Plain, yeah, I think he's a game changer. And chances are that I won't be able to answer all the questions that we would want to know about that site. If you did, that's it. So what you do have is a very thorough archive, all available. You have all the artifacts, all correctly labeled, catalogued, boxed, and all stored and all the rest of it. And you have my version of that story. In 100 years' time and what have you, long after I've gone, I would like to think that project was well enough done that students can come in with more skills, more techniques, more learning, and can actually still draw stuff out of that site. Then you know you've made a real contribution.
It is just like you're peeling back the pages of a book of time and getting closer to a clearer story and a clearer picture, the more work is done. As you said, students in the future may be able to add even more color to that picture as they do further work on it. And I think actually that brings me on to just wanting to know a bit more about entering the world now. So if you were speaking to a room full of young adults in their late teens, their 20s, and they're just intrigued by this and think, I've always had a bit of a fascination there. What advice, what steps should somebody take now to head that way?
Well, if they're young enough, really young, then I would always suggest now that you enroll, or they enrolled in the Young Archaeologist Club. Now that would take you between the age of I think 8 and 18 or 8 and 16. But there are young archaeologist clubs all over the country, and the people who run those clubs do an incredible amount of valuable work introducing children, young people to archaeology. That then would rub off the corners and give you an idea of what archaeology is all about. If you want, then go on. Nowadays, by and large, most people who are in the world of archaeology go to university. I didn't go to university. I learned basically, in a trench and picked it up as I went along. I did go to probably one of the most, if not the most important excavation I ever went on. My first one. That was a training excavation, and it trained you in the basic principles of how to use tools, how to record, what have you. What it doesn't teach you is how to interpret, how to tell the story from the layers that you see, and only that comes with experience. But I believe now you can do. There are apprenticeships people do take you in. So if you're not necessarily academically advanced, if you like, and I'd count myself in that role as well. I'm better on the end of a pick and shovel than I am on the end of a pencil. I've had to learn and adapt, and I can do that. But my instinct, my natural me, is to be in there shifting muck,
Yeah, I think you do yourself down a bit there. I can tell.
Yeah.
I could obviously that's your preference, but I've read some of what you've written, and you can write. So and that helps as well.
Oh, it can. But I tell you what, it takes me. It's a hell of a job for me. It takes me a hell of a long time to do it. Where some people can write, they don't mean to say they write well. I like to think that whatever I write well. It takes me a long time. But I analyze each sentence, I analyze each bit, because I know that when I submit that text for publication, if I'm not happy with it, I'm never going to be happy with it. And I don't want to have to go back to that and think, God, I wish I could change that. It's got to be right.
So the work took you as well. I mentioned it at the beginning, and you touched as well. The work took you as well into a completely different world of television. With Time Team, just such a classic series, been running for many, many years now, of course. Why do you think they came to you as one of the wider team that they pulled in on this?
Well, I could say charisma, good look, and all that sort of thing, but talent, But no, I just happened to be in the right place at the right time, and I met the producer of Time Team off of a previous series that he'd done, went out on Channel 4, and he was directed in my direction by Mick Aston, the late great Mick Aston, good old mate of mine. Mick was fronting the program, and they just wanted somebody who could talk about flint tools. And Mick said, why don't you ask Phil? He can talk about flint tools. Not only will he talk about flint tools, he can make flint tools. And so when my first role, if you like, in TV in that respect was as a flint knapper. And then I got to know the director and producer. And obviously it became obvious that I was not just a flint knapper, but I was a field archaeologist. And I remember him talking about Time Team, and I kept on, I remember him saying about Time Team, and I said, you keep talking about, what is Time Team? I never heard of it. And who is it? Where is it? Sort of thing. Who's involved? He said, you can be if you want to be. That was my audition.
Sort of, what's your highlights reel, your greatest memories from the program?
I mean, I suppose it should be the impact, the impact that it made. But of course, for me, difficult to know what the impact was, but because I'm on the inside looking out. Most people who come up to me, like yourself, you're on the outside looking in. And, I am still gobsmacked at times by the impact that it made, and people still love it. They still love it. They still remember it fondly. And
I think it had a substantial impact. I mean, I don't know for statistics, but one thing I do recall, especially from some of the early years, so the first 10 years or so before the proliferation of other channels, Netflix and everything like that, is a program about archaeology genuinely had what they call those water cooler moments in an office, in that people would come in and say, did you see that episode? And did you see what happened last night? And for people working in an office to talk about archaeology finds the next day, I think that is just a massive impact in terms of awareness, enthusiasm.
You're probably in a better position to answer that question than I am, because you have all that. I was just doing my job. I was just being an archaeologist, and I mean, if you had to take away TV or archaeology from me, take the TV away, because archaeology is people, the word that they use about the way I talk about archaeology is passion. And I don't know to that extent what passion is, but I do have a passion for archaeology. I love archaeology. I always want to be an archaeologist. I am an archaeologist. It's what I've done with my life. Like I said, right from the word go, it's why I'm here. And, while there is still breath in these lungs and blood in these veins that keeps making me or allowing me to be an archaeologist, and as long as this keeps working, then that's what I'll do. Simple as that.
One thing I am keen to do, Phil, to ask you, which is a bit cheeky perhaps, but in the sort of in the area we're discussing in archaeology and peeling back the layers of time, thinking about your own career and yourself now, a lot of the people who listen to this are starting on their careers. And if you could think about when you were starting out, what advice you might go back in time to give your younger self about what to do, what not to do, what might you say to a teenage Phil?
If you are lucky enough to be like me and know what you wanted to do, then I would say you have to be bloody minded and persistent. Don't get me wrong. I had a lot of pressure to give up being an archaeologist, mainly from, and I'll be bluntly honest, from my parents. My dad was a bit laid back about the whole thing. Mother was definitely not that I should spend my life grubbing around in
the dirt. What does she want you to do?
She always wanted me to do a far more, conventional life. And I dug my heels in and I kept going. And my God, I'm glad I did. And the number of people that say to me, Phil, you don't realize how lucky you are. And I say, what do you mean you don't know how lucky I am? You do a job that you enjoy. And I go, well, isn't that like what everybody does? And they all look at me, if only you knew. And I say, people go through their lives doing jobs that they are dissatisfied, that don't give them any pleasure. Yes, that's the convention. You are an exception. You actually enjoy what you do. And I can't get my head round that. We are only on this planet for a very short amount of time. For God's sake, make something of it. Anybody knows what they want to be. Don't have to be an archaeologist. They can be, a banker or a lorry driver, if that's a passion, it doesn't matter what it is, if that's what they want to do, for God's sake, go out and do it. It might not be the best paying job in Christendom, but for God's sake, be happy. Make the most of your time on this planet.
Phil, I think that is a fantastic way to finish here now. It's a mantra, not just for somebody who's pursued such a fascinating and successful career in archaeology. It's pretty much a mantra for life when it comes to your career. And I've taken so much out of this conversation. From a practical level, it's been interesting to learn the sheer variety of career routes that now exist within archaeology, actual paid roles, developing if you want through management, but undersea archaeology, as well as sort of archaeology that's created in built up areas. There are so many opportunities. And also if you're starting on your career and this is even tweaking a bit of interest or building on interest you've already got, you mentioned about the young archaeologists clubs, get yourself involved, get your hands dirty, basically. And overall, if you can find your passion, as you clearly have, if you can find it, then make the most of it, because you only have this one go, this one life. And you said at the beginning as well that almost whatever you start doing, just do it as well as you possibly can. Work hard at it, which applies to anything and to so many different roles that we speak to people about on Careers Unwrapped. So Phil, I found it really interesting. It's been fascinating. Thank you so much for joining us today, for unwrapping your own career and for painting a picture of what life as an archaeologist can be like. Thank you very much.
My pleasure.
This podcast is sponsored by We Are Futures. To find out more about We Are Futures and how we can introduce your brand, business, or organisation to the mass markets of tomorrow, visit www.wearefutures.com. Make sure to search for Careers Unwrapped in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, or anywhere else podcasts are found. Remember to click subscribe so you don't miss out on any future episodes. On behalf of the team here at We Are Futures, thanks for listening.